welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with take 2 of Proof of Divine Authorship of the Torah with Rabbi Chaim Coffman. If you were tuned in earlier, you have to give away of the internet issues. I think we may have them resolved. Instead of uploading a spliced video, we're just going to start from scratch because we had a few interruptions along the way. So starting fresh right now with Rabbi Chaim Coffman, and we're going to get right back on the horse, starting from the top. So this is part 2 of the same show we began last week. Last show was Proof of Divine Authorship. And it's a really interesting story because I see a lot of people who decide to, after leaving Christianity, they decide that the entire Tanakh, the entire Torah, everything is also misled as well. And so they tend to jump the gun and jump right off and go off in the deep end somewhere else without actually checking out. Because they think that the entire Bible, the entire Christian Bible and Hebrew Scriptures together, they think that all that was just one package. They don't know that it was 2 different packages, if you want to call it that.
But don't most people go back to the original? You know, most people go back and they don't veer off. No,
no, that's true. That is true. A majority of them do stick, and they'll find that Judaism has true teachings in the Torah. But a handful of them will tend to jump off altogether. A very popular one that most people know, and I'm presuming this. What I'm fixing to say, I'm presuming this. Really excellent teacher, brilliant. He's a professor, Professor Bart Ehrman. Everybody knows who this guy is. But he's at this point, he's basically atheist, no, maybe not agnostic, maybe. But I've never seen in any of his teachings where he's teaching why the Hebrew Scriptures is wrong. He only teaches why the New Testament's wrong. So my thought was, if that's the case, and that's the only thing he teaches about the New Testament, and now he's basically atheist, then he would appear to be one who, throughout the entire Bible, because he found out the New Testament was messed up. So, not really sure.
So that would make sense, because if that's based on the quote unquote Old Testament, then there's something wrong with that. Right. Then obviously, it's like a domino effect.
Right. Very good. Okay, so I'm gonna let you take this away, and hopefully we'll have an uninterrupted broadcast this time. If you stop messing up my system, we'll be all right. Okay.
I don't know. It keeps going back and forth. I miss you, you miss me. All of a sudden, the lights are flickering. Like Twilight Zone.
It's a Demogorgon.
What's going on? I was like, we mentioned off air. It's like being in a bad Freddy Krueger movie. It's like just like I'm going around. I'm like I'm still in the same dream.
That's funny.
Okay, take 2.
The flickering lights thing is there's a new thing on the flickering lights. There's a show called Stranger Things. It's like a series, and when the lights flicker, there's like this Demogorgon spirit that comes in. It's pretty crazy. Anyway,
it was like someone playing the organ, right? Someone playing like Gregorian chant. I know. I had to learn that in what do you call it, music appreciation in college. I can't even tell you. It's like the monks. Like hearing the monks sing. It was like. Anyway, we digress here, right?
Yes, sir. All right, take it away.
So we spoke a few weeks back, right? We'll do this, part 2 or part 3, whatever it is, 2.5. We spoke a few weeks back, showing or trying to show, and actually we'll probably do this in upcoming shows about miracles. We tried to show through the story of Revelation, right? God came to the Jewish people, and everything really starts from there, God revealing himself and everything else. So we spoke quite a bit about that. So there are a few things I want to try and tackle today, and one of them seemingly we spoke about, but we'll speak about it again. I think it's still important. But keep in mind, even with people will say, okay, you went through cosmology, you went through morality, you went through Jewish history, right? We'll speak about a little bit about Jewish history. Again, but you spoke about all these things. Is that a clear-cut proof? Nothing's clear-cut in general. You have to look at all the parts. And you take all the parts in, you can't say, wow, I got all this information. It really looks good. I can still have my doubts. Anyone can still have doubts, right? But at the end of the day, if the proof is there, and the majority of proof is there, the doubts are minimal, right? And if the doubts are minimal, let's say I could prove 70%, that certainly that the Torah is true, if I knew 70% of the time, which is a good example, if I knew 70% of the time I play roulette and the number 13 red comes up, I'm going to make a lot of money, right? I'll lose money, but I'm going to make a ton of money. I'll be rich. I won't even be doing your show because I'll be too rich, right? So knowing that information and seeing the information gives me the ability to say that this has validity. Right. So the first thing, we'll go a little bit scientific. We spoke about it before, but I just want to reemphasize. You look at Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 9. Torah says you're allowed to eat things in the water, fish, right, that have fins and scales, right? Those things, those fish are allowed to eat. What does God tell you? I got two witnesses. I got one witness that is scales, one witness that is fins. Put them together, you're never going to find a creature that has scales that does not have fins. Someone brought up a few weeks back, what about a catfish? Whatever. There are different things that we can answer up for. Are they really scales or not scales, etc. But in general, any species of fish that has scales will have fins. Now, what they've done also is they've taken non-kosher species and mated them with kosher species, made a whole new species of fish that have scales and fins. Now, there is a problem. I'll just throw this out there. There is a halachic problem because normally, let's say a fish or anything else that is not kosher, we say whatever comes out of it is also not kosher. But the problem is I've mated this non-kosher fish with a kosher fish. So what does the next species have? Scales and fins. But if it has scales and fins, I should be allowed to eat it, right? It's genetically modified. Nonetheless, I should be allowed to eat it. Technically, it's got scales or fins, right? But the issue is, even though it's got scales and fins, whatever comes out of a non-kosher animal, whatever it is, I shouldn't be allowed to eat it, right? So there's a question with that. But in general, we speak about fish, right? Doesn't matter. Whatever has scales, going to have fins. The world is 72% water. So there are 40,000 different kinds of fish, billions of different species. So when you think about it, with all these different species, etc., then you're going to have to tell me, how did Moshe Rabbeinu know? How can Moshe Rabbeinu make such a statement? Right? Again, we're going to make the Karaites happy here. We're not going to, delve into Jewish law. We're not going to quote a midrash. We're not going to go into, anything else. We're not going to go into the Talmud. Clear. It's got scales and fins, right? Anything that has scales and fins. So how does Moshe Rabbeinu know? Right? If the world is 72% water, and the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu lived in the Fertile Crescent, he didn't get out. He would have had to hire tens of millions of people. Okay, Moshe Rabbeinu was rich. We understand Moshe Rabbeinu was rich. God made him rich, but still, even if he made him rich, it would have cost him a fortune. An absolute fortune. Expeditions, people going to all the different oceans, rivers, streams, and he has to go through all the different types of fish. Right? That's a little bit hard to say that Moshe Rabbeinu is Dr. Doolittle, so to speak, and he knows these 40 different thousand types of fish. He wasn't living in an area where there were tons of fish till he got to the sea, but still, that's only one body of water, right? And they only crossed that one, but they didn't go through all of it. They crossed through it, etc. But they didn't go through other bodies of water. They didn't see any other bodies of water, right? So obviously the question is going to be, Moshe Rabbeinu makes a statement, right? He makes a clear-cut statement. How does he know, right? So now we have another thing when it comes to kashrus, right? That an animal has to have split hooves, and it has to chew its cud, right? There are two signs. So how many species of animals do we have? We have more than 2 million different species of animals. Right, so we know ones that are kosher, right? Certainly a cow, sheep, deer, etc. But the Torah makes a statement, and the Torah says there are 4 animals that may fool you, right? You look at Leviticus chapter 11. The Torah tells you they have split hooves, right? Again, what are the signs? They have split hooves, and they chew its cud, right? But how do these animals, these 4 animals, 4 out of 2 million, right? How do they fool you? They only have one sign. Right, so they have one sign. You may think, oh, look, it's kosher. Choose its cud, or it's got split hooves. What are those 4 animals? A camel, a pig, right? A rabbit, and a hare, right? Those are the exceptions. There are no other exceptions. So either they chew their cud, right, or have split hooves, and chewing its cud, just in case anyone doesn't know, and you probably get grossed out by it anyway, and that is that when the food arrives in the stomach, it exits the body from the mouth, and then back, and then from the back of the animal swallows it, and again, it redigests it. Again, it's kind of gross, but in general, you have 4 exceptions, right? 4 exceptions out of 2 million. Now, 4 out of 2 million, how in the world is Moshe Rabbeinu going to know? So I can tell you how he knows, because God told him. But if we're going to look at it in a neutral way, we're going to analyze according to science, according to logic, whatever analysis you want to use, you have to come up with some sort of explanation, right? And it shouldn't be half-baked, right? Come up with a plausible explanation. How in the world Moshe Rabbeinu is going to know that there are, of 2 million species in the world, not just where he lives. If it's where he lives, I can understand. He can get around, get other people to help him, right? Whatever. But if you're talking about the entire world, even though the world was relatively small at that time, right? Other places hadn't been discovered, whatever the case is. But 2 million different types of species, right? 40,000 different types of species of fish. That's even worse, because the world is 72% water. So if the world is 72% water, how's he going to know that? How's he going to know these exceptions? 4 out of 2 million. You don't think there are any more? Maybe there are 10. Maybe there are 50. Maybe there are, 100,000 different exceptions. The Torah says there are 4. Now, you have to keep in mind, when we talk about validity, right? Validity of the Torah, there cannot be any mistakes, right? If there's any mistake in any book that claims to be a book given by God, then if you have a mistake, that means it cannot be true. Christianity, million mistakes. Islam, million mistakes. Other so-called religions, not going to be hard to find mistakes. You find one mistake in the fact, whatever the Torah says is not true. That's it. We don't do anything. There's no kosher. There's no holidays. There's no Shabbos, right? There's no keeping the Sabbath. There's no nothing. Why would I keep anything if something in the Torah is not true, right? Even if you want to tell me, right, the conservative movement will say that there are 4 authors in a redactor, and they were divinely inspired. There was a whole committee, and they were divinely inspired. Very good. What do I care if they're divinely inspired? Even if they're divinely inspired, right? They're still going to have to find out, where are they going to get this information from? How are they going to know this information? Okay, they're a committee, right? Even if they're a committee, they're not going to be able to figure this out, right? So this is, I think, I'll go on record as saying, I think this is clear cut, that Moshe Rabbeinu cannot have got this information on his own, right? He wasn't Dr. Doodle. He didn't play him on TV. He didn't play him in a movie. There's no possible way, possibly, that Moshe Rabbeinu got such information, right? So that is one possibility, that the Torah could not have been written by man, that it has to be a godly document. Now, there are also predictions that the Torah makes. Now, if the Torah makes the prediction, and we're going to analyze a certain prediction, and we're going to analyze the different aspects of this prediction, and we're going to see if the aspects, you take the probability. Most people know I'm very much into statistics, even though statistics, you can use them for what you want. They may be a little bit misleading in general, but we're going to look at, okay, what's the chance this could have happened? What's the chance that could have happened, right? You're going to look at 5 or 6 different things. We're going to play the statistics. We're going to multiply them together, and we're going to see probability. We're going to see what level of probability it is. And if it's a small probability, right, a relatively small probability, so that should tell us the chances are probably very low, right? Extremely low that this could have happened. So therefore, what are we going to try and look for? We're going to look for a prediction. We're going to look at the different aspects of the prediction, and we're going to see, do these aspects of the prediction Do they hold water? No pun intended. Do they hold water or not? But you have to look at each one. You have to see in and of itself, did this happen? Is it plausible? You have to look at history. You have to look at other factors, involved. So we're going to have to analyze if a prediction is made and the prediction holds true, even though it's a very, very small percentage. Are we willing to bet our lives or our future in the next world or whatever? Is someone willing to bet their life that didn't happen? That could have been just, a chance, a chance happening or whatever. We spoke about, cosmology and the fact that the rule of thermodynamics, right? Something has to act on something else. Well, if there's a Big Bang, something acted, right? Something happened. What's the probability, right? According to the law of thermodynamics, what's the probability that that's going to happen in the world, it's going to come into being through an explosion? The probability, according to the law of thermodynamics, is zero. It's absolutely zero. It'll never happen, right? So therefore, something had to act. Something had to happen in order for that. You want to call it the Big Bang? Where'd the Big Bang come from? But it had to happen somewhere, right? So comes along the Torah. We're actually going to read it this week in synagogue. That we're going to read all the curses that happened to the Jewish people. Deuteronomy chapter 28 to chapter 30. We're not going to go through them. We don't have that much time, even though you gave me a little bit more time. But in general, what these are the curses given to the Jewish people. That there is reward and punishment. What happens if the Jewish people do not live up to the standard of what the Torah tells me? Right? There is reward and punishment. The Torah tells me, the Rambam says that there are 13 principles of faith. The first principle is the fact that God is absolute. God doesn't change. There's no such thing in Judaism as a God that is relative. Meaning that if he decides something, he doesn't decide something, he's not in charge, he lets other forces run things. Not true. Right? In other words, there's nothing outside of God, meaning they can't do anything without God warranting it. So therefore, another principle as well is the fact that God has the ability to reward and punish. Now, even if we say there's a committee, if there was a committee of 4 or 5 or whatever you want to call it, and you had this committee and they're divinely inspired, aren't they all men? If they're all men, why would I listen to them? What's going to enforce the fact that I'm going to keep Torah mitzvahs? There has to be something that's totally moral, that's absolute, that never changes, that's going to obligate me to do things. So comes along the Torah and says, if the Jewish people don't do what they're supposed to do, someone's going to say, hey, how do I know? How do you know that there's reward, that there's punishment? That if a person doesn't uphold what they're supposed to do, they're going to pay a price, some more, some less. Torah tells me clear. Torah says over here, if you don't live up to the standard of the Torah, if you don't do what the Torah says, there's going to be payback. So what are these gruesome predictions? So the gruesome predictions are that there's going to be conquest accompanied by wanton slaughter of the population, men, women, children, old, young, slaughtered. Meaning, what would I understand that to be? They're going to be wiped off the face of the map. It doesn't mean that, okay, some of them or whatever. Seemingly, it seems to be everybody, the entire population, right? So we're going to have to see. There's a prediction, an exile is going to result in worldwide scatter. Now, a exile, if the Jewish people, let's say, are exiled, so who says it's going to be worldwide, right? Who can make such a prediction? Maybe it's only going to be, let's say like happened to Babylonian exile. We'll see. They only went to Babylon, right? After the destruction of the temple. They went to Babylon. They went to Alexandria. They didn't go worldwide, right? They ended up in Greece. They ended up in other places. They ended up in a few places, right? But who's to say they're going to result when they are scattered all over the world? That's a big statement. If you tell me they're going to be scattered around this peninsula, that peninsula, whatever, around a certain area, okay, right? I could believe it. That's not a big leap of faith. But if you tell me they're going to be worldwide scattered, Not only that, the Jews will never have an independent government. So they're going to be scattered all over the world, and we saw this. We spoke about Jewish history. It was only much later, in the last 70, 80 years, right, that the Jewish people actually came back to their land. And you look at history in general, that's never happened, right? A nation kicked off their land never came back, except one. And when you look at what happened to the Jews, they had to go through the Egyptians. They had to go through the Babylonians. They had to go through the Greeks. They had to go through the Romans. They had to go through the pogroms, the Christian pogroms, in Europe. They had to go through the Holocaust, all kinds of things that they went through, and they should have been swallowed up by the culture around them. And that didn't happen, right? Miraculously, they still survived. By the Babylonian exile, just an example, tens of thousands, millions slaughtered, butchered, right? The Talmud says that where I live, so I don't know if it's exactly the same place, or nearby, but the Talmud says so many people in the area where I live were slaughtered that there was rivers of blood that went to the Dead Sea. Now, to get to the Dead Sea, unless it was very close and, things changed, over time, right? It's a good hour, more than an hour. It's at least a good hour and a half, about 50, 60 kilometers, 30 miles, 40 miles or more, to get there. So you can tell me, okay, let's say it wasn't that far, it was really closer, or the point is that even if it's an exaggeration, what is the Talmud telling you? A lot of people died. A lot of people got slaughtered. There was blood flowing in the streets, right? Gallons and gallons of Jewish blood. Now, that being the case, after the destruction of the temple, after the slaughter, the absolute slaughter by the Babylonians, the Jews should have disappeared, right? At that point, there shouldn't have been any Jews left, right? But miraculously, they survived, right? But they survived without an independent government, right? So now we're going to have to look at these predictions. We're going to have to see these predictions and exactly what happened. Was this accurate or was it not? So let's look at the first prediction. That one result of the exile is that Jews will be brought back by boat to Egypt, right? The Torah says they are going to be sold as slaves. Now, it's interesting because I just went through this morning, right, learning about it earlier. And it's an interesting statement that the Torah says. That the Torah says the Jews are going to be sold as slaves. They're not going to be purchased. They're not going to be purchased. So they're going to be sold. So they're going to be on the trading block, right? You're talking about a slave trade, right? Many moons ago, right? There was a slave trade, right? All over. They're going to be sold as slaves, but they're not going to be purchased. But nonetheless, the Jews are going to survive. Somehow, they are going to survive, and they're not going to be completely destroyed, and they're ultimately going to return to the land of Israel, right? Which again, logically speaking, to make such a statement that they are going to survive from all these different things is absolutely miraculous, right? And you don't have to be necessarily a believer to say that. I mean, we saw what Mark Twain said, the Jewish people shouldn't exist. Right? He came to Israel and he said exactly what the prophecy said. Israel plowed over, right? I won't, maybe it was a Bible thumper, whatever it was, but many made the comment that Jews should never still exist, right? Definitely should never exist. Now, it also predicts that the conqueror is going to speak a language the Jewish people do not understand, right? So now you ask the $1 million question, who cares? What's the difference if they're going to speak a language that the Jews don't understand? So when you look at this prediction, it's certainly unique that how is somebody going to know that? Right? Normally, if countries are nearby and they swallow up that population is probably going to know and understand the language of where they're living. Even if they don't know it, they'll learn it. Right? But who can make such a statement and say that they're going to speak a language the Jews don't know, that the Jews don't understand? Right? Because again, if it's a prediction that other people can explain, if it's possible to explain, then it's not crucial. Then it's not unique. Because then you can say, okay, I could explain it this way. I have a different explanation. You want to say it's the Torah, it's the Bible? I got another explanation. There is such an explanation. It doesn't make sense, right? You look at the book of Exodus, and the book of Exodus talks about all the plagues. All the plagues are l'mala min hateva. They're above nature, because God takes the Jewish people out of Egypt above nature. You got blood, you got frogs, vermin, killing of the firstborn. You got all these things. Egypt totally decimated. So, when the Jewish people come out, and the Egyptians die as they're going through the sea, they finish going through the sea, God destroys them. There is such an opinion. How did all the miracles happen? Not because God did it. How did all the miracles happen? I heard this many years ago, and it's incredulous that someone could actually say such a thing, and actually, believe it more than quote unquote what the Bible says. But what did they hold? They held that Saturn was out of orbit. Now, if Saturn's out of orbit, it made all these catastrophes. Now again, if a person is a thinking person, does that make sense? We're talking logic, right? Forget about the Bible. We're talking logic, right? Saturn being out of orbit, can it cause all these things to happen? One of the things people want to claim, is the fact that when the Jewish people go through the sea, how did the Egyptians drown? It was high tide. Okay, there's only one problem. I mean, there are a few issues with that, but one problem is that the sea was like suspended animation. Went to one side, went to the other side. The Jewish people walked straight through, right? That's what our sages tell us. So if that's the case, that's on high tide. High tide is not going to cause it for so long that the sea on both sides, right? That the sea on both sides are going to be suspended animation, and they're going to be so suspended that 3 million people can walk through over days. That's not how high tide works, right? It's not going to be for that long, not even close, right? But again, why are people going to grasp at straws? Why are people still going to hold by evolution? Same thing, because otherwise you have to say that the Torah is true, right? Or the Bible is true. So over here, if it's a prediction that other people can explain, then it's not unique, right? You have to come up with some explanation. If you can come up with an explanation, okay, then it's a moot point, right? Just like Moshe Rabbeinu, shows the Egyptians, does the stick trick and whatever with the stick, and it turns into a snake, and he grabs the tail, and it turns back to a staff, or whatever the case is, right? The Egyptians, they can also do it. So what's the big thing? Moshe Rabbeinu's saying, oh, look, this is what God's going to show you. He said, oh, we can do the same thing. So Moshe Rabbeinu was like, God, what are you doing to me over here? Right? Well, what's the whole point? God wanted to show that, they're going to harden themselves. They're going to harden their hearts. They're not going to let them go. And God's going to wipe them out. Right? But over here, so if it doesn't distinguish between what you're claiming and what others claim, so again, you're not going to be unique over here. So let's see the details. So whether they're coming true, whether they could be explained sociologically or by some other ideology, whatever it's going to be, or some other way that you're going to try and disprove this. Now, if someone would agree with our prediction, according to our source, now this is another interesting point, then his making that prediction can't count against us, right? What does that mean? In other words, if the Christians and the Muslims, they agree that the Torah is true, right? It's just we're not chosen anymore. We usurped the power. We did other things, whatever it is. If they accept that the Torah is true, they also accept Deuteronomy chapter 28 to chapter 30. And they also predict, they would also agree that the Jews are going to be exiled. Why are they going to be exiled? Because they failed to live up to what the Torah says. Now, so what does that have to do with the Muslims and the Christians? Because if that's true, and that prediction comes true, it doesn't give Christianity and Islam evidence against Judaism. It doesn't say, oh, see, we're chosen, they're not chosen anymore. Even if that's true, we're going to use it against them. If you believe it to be true, you can't throw it at them, right? Because we agree on this prediction. So they can't throw it at the Jews and say, oh, look, you've done this, you've done that. But this part we agree it, right? If you agree, you agree. If you disagree, right, you disagree, right? Which boggles the mind, just as the side point we mentioned a few weeks back, the fact that both the Muslims and the Christians agree God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, right? In front of 2 million, 3 million people, whatever it was. No, they agree that happened. No one else makes such a claim, right? It's mind-boggling. They themselves don't make such a claim, right? Muhammad had this vision, whatever happened to JC, but it wasn't in front of millions. It wasn't in front of anybody, right? There's no evidence over here. So let's see a little bit of this prediction, right? And we're going to try and be neutral over here, right? And see if this prediction, holds up according to critique. So what's the first prediction? First prediction is total destruction. Total destruction means the decimation of the population and exile. Now, if you look back at history in the ancient world, right, very exciting history if you're into it, this was very rare, right? It was rare. What was the purpose of being conquered? Why would a nation conquer another nation? It's economic, right? It was a question of what? Of acquiring colonies. They wanted colonies. They wanted to tax them. They wanted to work them, very hard, etc. If you slaughter them, then you don't have a colony. You don't have anybody around, right? You're not going to slaughter them and exile them. Doesn't really make sense, right? It's either one or the other, right? It's either you exile them, they're still alive, right? Or you swallow them, you slaughter them, there's no one alive. Now, you could tell me, maybe I'm talking about theft, right? But, okay, so let's say you rummage and pillage. You take all the gold. You take all the silver. You take all the gems, all the fine linen. Great, so that makes you rich. So now you got all these things. Very good. But now what about workers? Right? What about the young, strong men? What am I'm not going to use them as slaves. Right? What about good-looking women? Right? Use them for sexual purposes, whatever. So in general, there is not going to be a wantonly slaughter of the rest of the population. Why? Because you're interested in making a colony. You're interested in making a tax base. You're interested in having good natural resources. You're interested in slaves building up the land. Why would you slaughter them? Right? That was not common. It was rare. It was rare in that world. That wouldn't make sense according to what was going on, that they're going to slaughter all these people and not have a tax base. Right? That's the first thing. Right? Now, we see also during the 300 years of the rule of the Romans, right? The great mighty Romans, they only did this to two people. They only tried to wipe out two people. One was Carthage, and who was the other? The Jews. Right? That was it. They didn't do it to anybody else. And Rome was a tremendously huge empire for 300 years. Now, of all the nations they took over, right? Tens of hundreds of nations they took over, whatever it was, only two they didn't, right? Two, they just wanted to slaughter them. So the prediction of wanton slaughter of a population, how in the world can that be anticipated? Because that wasn't the normal procedure. Even if it happened here and there, right? That's not the prediction. The prediction is total destruction, total decimation, right? If that's going to be the case, it's not practical. And if it's not practical, who in the world is going to make an impractical prediction, right? That's not going to happen, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is there's a prediction that the conqueror is going to speak a language you don't understand. Now, when you think about this, it also doesn't make sense, right? Why in the world would I think, in general, that a conqueror is going to be somebody, you don't understand what he says, right? You don't understand the language. Neighboring countries certainly understood one another's languages, right? In Europe, it's not uncommon for people to know 4 or 5 languages, right? The joke is, is that, what do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. 2 languages? Bilingual. 1 language? American, right? So, Americans know 1 language, basically, and there are other nations, let's say, like I said, in Europe, that they know more than 1 language, 2 languages, 3 languages, 4 languages, not uncommon, right? So therefore, neighboring countries normally understood another people's language. So there's enough commerce and travel, each one to be familiar with the language. So why would I think such a thing? Couldn't we have been conquered by a neighbor? Why do I have to think it's somebody coming from, 50,000 miles away at a different planet or whatever, right? Different continent. Why couldn't it have been someone nearby? Also, why couldn't a person or a country be conquered that spoke an international language? At that time, what did many Jews understand? What language? Greek. Greek in those days, similar to English today, right? Business contracts, trade, diplomacy, they were conducted in Greek. So if it was any Greek-speaking nation that conquered an exile, right? They exiled us, let's say. The prediction, 100%, would have been false. Why? Because even if they exiled us, we understood the language, right? There were Jews that were in Babylonia who got exiled there. We also understood the language, right? Understood Babylonian, right? They spoke Aramaic, right? It's where the Talmud comes from, etc. But the Romans, interesting enough, came along. What did the Romans speak? Latin, right? Who speaks Latin today? Right? When they spoke Latin. Latin was a language, Jews, obviously, not familiar with. Now, so that being said, that's not common, right? In other words, what's the prediction, right? Let's go back to the prediction. The prediction was that a conqueror will speak a language you don't understand, right? Now, the question is going to be, what are the odds? If it's a neighboring country, you probably know their language. If it's a country where it's an international language, i.e. Greek, they're going to know the language, right? If they're nearby, someone comes along far away, okay, who's going to make such a prediction, right? That's not going to be a common prediction. And a nation's going to be exiled. Who says, and this is what we sort of started with, right? Who says they're going to end up all over the world, right? That's the prediction. When the Jews get exiled, they're going to be scattered everywhere. You're going to have the biggest Seder in Kathmandu, right? All these Israelis in Tibet. What are Israelis doing in Tibet, right? They got Tibet, Thailand, other places, see the world, get a little bit of religion. They don't want to be part of their own religion, etc. Jews are everywhere. 100% they're everywhere. There's even a Chabad house in all the 50 states, right? So Jews are everywhere. Why should that be an automatic consequence of exile, right? If we understand how exile works, and you're going to send a nation to exile, who in the world says they're going to be exiled all over the world? They're going to, you're going to have Jews in Timbuktu. They're going to be in Pago Pago. They're going to be, from one end of the world to the other, anywhere you go. You're going to see Jews. I remember when I was first married, so on our honeymoon, went to Europe, and, the only people that travel more, I think, than the Japanese, I think Israelis, see Israelis, all over the place. It's unbelievable, place after place we went, you heard people speaking Hebrew. I'm like, where in the world am I? It's like, Yitzchak, people, waving to their friends, different things. They're like, I was in Venice. We were on a gondola, right? One of these gondola boats, with another family. And this guy sees someone he knows. He's like standing up in the boat. He's like, Yitzchak. He's like waving. I'm like, I pulled him down. I was like, listen, I want to drown over here. Like the boat's like going back and forth, etc. But who says that this is an automatic consequence of exile? Not everyone's exiled from their country ends up with identifiable communities all over the world, right? That is unheard of. If they're exiled, maybe they're exiled to one place. Maybe they're exiled to two places. Maybe it's nearby. Let's say we'll be generous. Within 500 miles, 1,000 miles, 700 kilometers, right? They're not going to go that far, right? Unless, let's say, like they took the blacks from Africa, took them to the States, whatever. But again, you're not talking that type of exile, right? Not that far. That's, it's also not as common. So, something like that. But who in the world's going to exile? Who's going to make such a prediction? They're going to be exiled all over the world. Even when the Babylonian exile, right, 500 years earlier, right, we didn't end up all over the world. Where did they end up? Vast majority, it says, went to Babylon, right? That's where they went, the vast majority. A large group went to Alexandria in Egypt. But you would think, okay, maybe they went other places, but that was it, right? That's where they ended up. They didn't go so far. So why should I think, or why should anybody think that the Jews are going to end up in many places of the world without identifiable groups of Jews? Meaning there's not going to be a huge population. If there's not a huge population, obviously it's going to be bad for Jewish survival, right? No question, right? It's a whole nother thing, right? But in general, how in the world can you have communities, all over the world that, have very small, if not almost non-existent populations? But the point is that who's going to make such a prediction? So if they're going to end up in exile, how can someone say 100% with confidence some of them are going to be taken back to Egypt, they're going to be sold, and that there's not going to be anyone to buy them, right? Also, right, we mentioned that earlier. And if the slave trade was flourishing, which it was at the time, there were many known slave routes, right? 100%, right? That 100% has been documented. Who's to say they're not going to get sold? You want to tell me they're the ugliest people ever created? They're all deformed. Whatever the case is, no one's going to take them. You're going to tell me there's a 0% chance they're going to be on the slave market and nobody in their right mind is going to take them? Now, that makes sense, right? If you tell me there were no slave trade, there was no flourishing markets, okay, right? Then maybe you have a my father of blessed memory would say, maybe you got a shake, right? Maybe you got a chance. But in general, if there are slave routes, slave trade is flourishing, how's someone going to make such a prediction? Now, also, how can you tell me that if they're going to be scattered all over the world, they're never going to have a Jewish society to form? Meaning, they're not going to form an independent government. Anywhere. Anywhere in the world. Argentina, Pago, right? Wherever. Canada, Africa, Australia, Europe. They're not going to find any place in the world they're never going to set up a Jewish enclave. Right? Meaning they're going to have their own independent place. How in the world are you going to make such a claim? Now, this prediction, we're talking more than 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, there's no such thing as Atlas, right? He wasn't even a thought in his mother's mind, right? 2,000 years ago, no maps, right? All you had was really maps, right? It wasn't organized though. 100% wasn't organized, with maps, boundary lines, every square millimeter. For goodness sakes, it wasn't Google Earth. Imagine, no Google Earth. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna find, this, find out where I live, where someone else is, what's going on, in that place? They didn't have anything. No maps, no boundaries. Not only that, there were vast areas of the world, right, of the Earth's surface unclaimed, unsettled, where you had Russia, you had parts of Russia, former Soviet Union, North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, you had Central Africa, you had all these places, right, that were pretty much uninhabited, unsettled. So someone makes a prediction. That when the Jewish people go in exile, they're not going to form an independent society in any of these places. Right? That seems to be unheard of. Right? They should have some enclave somewhere over time. You're talking 2,000 years. This is a lot of time. That's never going to happen. right? It's only happened in recent history. And we understand it's happened in recent history because we're living in the Messianic era. Doesn't mean we're still going to be here when the Messiah comes, but everyone agrees we're living in the Messianic era, right? But that's only happened at the end. Certainly the last 2,000 years, not even close. We had all the Crusades, the Ramban, almost 1,000 years ago. When he came to the land of Israel, he couldn't find 10 Jews. There weren't Jews here, right? The place was totally desolate. Now, if we look at each prediction, if I don't have a Jewish perspective, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to be neutral like Switzerland. Or I'm going to look at it as a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Confucianist, or I'm going to look at it as an atheist. Then if I'm going to look at it in those ways, right, in these eyes, so to speak, I'm not going to be able to explain, I'm not going to be able to explain these things if they happened. You're going to have to come up with an explanation, of all these things. Now, we mentioned earlier, so I'm very big into statistics. Let's look at probability, right? Let's look a little bit at probability of all these predictions, right? From a non-Jewish point of view. Now, the probability, we're going to say, because it's going to be clear, the probability is going to be very low. Now, let's look at the first thing, total destruction, exile. So we saw that that's not very common. So let's say of all ancient wars, this happened 10% of the time. So what would a non-Jewish observer say? Okay, we'll give it 1 out of 10, right? 10%. Now, how often did a conqueror speak an unknown language? So that we don't really know, because neighbors fought, languages, great empires certainly were widely known. So I'm in a good mood. I'm pretty generous over here. So let's say it was a quarter of the time, 25%. Now, being scattered all over the world as the result of exile. Now, as far as I know, and I understand, that never happened, right? That is zero, right? It really should be zero. But again, I'm in a generous mood over here. So I'm going to give that probability, again, 1 out of 10, right? I'll give it 10%, but the reality is it never happened. But okay, I'll give it 10%. Now, if you take a nation scattered all over the world, not able to find itself an independent society, right? No independent society. Now, what would be the probability? Now, I don't know, right? I mean, I'm not sure what the probability would be. Let's say, for argument's sake, I'll give it 1 out of 4, right? I'll be generous. I'll say it's 25%. Maybe it could happen. And to survive under these conditions and return to the land. Now, we saw that a few weeks back when we spoke about Jewish history. That never happened, except once. It only happened by the Jews, right? So really, that probability is zero. Again, I'll be generous, and I'll say it's 1 out of 10, right? So now, how do you figure out probability? You figure out probability, you multiply the sequence of events, right, by the probability. So what do I have? I got 1 out of 10. I got 1 out of 4. I got 1 out of 10. I got 1 out of 4. And I got 1 out of 10. Now, 2 of those really should be 0, but okay, right? We gave it 1 out of 10. So now, what's the probability? The probability of 1 over 10 times 1 over 4 times 1 over 10 times 1 over 4 times 1 over 10. What do you get? 1 over 16,000. 1 over 16,000 is an extremely small number. Now, we're talking about somebody who's neutral. Somebody who's neutral is going to make that type of prediction. Now, what is the likelihood that a prediction like this is going to come true? The prediction for someone who's neutral, again, we mentioned it's neutral, looking at it in a neutral way. That's 1 chance every 16,000 tries. So if you look at it in that way, there's no possible way. 1 out of 16,000, there's no possible way to explain why it came true. But it did come true. How did it come true? The Jewish people are scattered all over the place. Jewish people came back to their homeland. They established a homeland, even after 2,000 years. right? All these things, they were taken captive underneath a group, underneath the Romans. They didn't understand the language. That happened. All these things happened. Now, what we called earlier a unique prediction. It's a prediction no one else can explain. That's why it's called unique, right? Had anyone seen the prediction before it happened, right? Someone would have said, yeah, just like, I'm not even going to mention his name, begins with T, ends with a P. No one's going to say that he should have become president. Nobody, right? No one's going to make such a prediction. Nobody. It's unique. People would have said, come on, this is going to happen. This is exactly what's going to be. Not a chance. So when it comes to truth and the truth of Judaism, it 100% is a relevant piece of evidence. Now, let's break it down. See, I got a few more minutes here. There are a few technical things over here. One is that when you look at the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, there are many details not listed, right? It doesn't give a lot of detail. Now, there are two possible reasons. Either the language they were expressed is either poetical, right? It's sort of like poetry, can't be defined, right? Meaning that we can't prove the text means specifically, in fact, what happened. That's one possible explanation, right? Because it's hard to read. Or you say that the predictions are likely to happen in the context of destruction and exile. So again, even in either case, it's not necessarily going to significantly lower the probability, right? That's one thing. A second thing is some of these probabilities are conditional, i.e., that the Jews are going to be scattered worldwide, and survival, return, right? They're going to come back. One is sort of dependent on the other. If they're scattered, they'll come back, right? But if you understand it in this way, then I can multiply to get the probability of all events occurring, because one is sort of dependent, on the other. And again, that's an over-generous estimate, because two of those factors we mentioned, 1 out of 10, should have really been 0 because it never happened, right? That's the second thing. A third thing is, what's the probability of these predictions coming true, right? They're not for the predictions having been made. Really, I could have thought that the reason someone's going to make such a frightening prediction, maybe to scare people, whatever, right? But, how is that going to be, right? What would be the reason someone is going to make such a prediction? And the fourth thing is that there are many nations, certainly not surprising, there are other nations could have suffered these predictions. Right? They also could have suffered these predictions. So why do we regard it as something surprising that it happened to us? Maybe if we dig a little bit and we go throughout, throughout world history, maybe we'll find other nations, same boat. Right? You're probably not going to, but in theory, maybe that could be. Now, why do we regard it over here as being unbelievably surprising that it happened to us? And the reason it's surprising is because we predicted it would happen. In other words, if it wasn't predicted, it's one thing. But the fact that it happened, and it happened because we predicted it, that's a whole different thing, right? I'll give one other example that we see in the book of Exodus. What are the greatest miracles that happened to the Egyptians, that they got knocked around, right? A lot of unbelievable miracles. But what was the greatest miracle? The greatest miracle was that every time Moshe Rabbeinu said, okay, you're going to get now a plague of frogs. And what happened? There were frogs. And now you're going to get a plague of vermin, right? Frogs go away, you're going to get vermin. And what happened? They got vermin. And then there's going to be another plague of this and another plague of that. Why is that the greatest? Why isn't the plague itself the greatest? So the reason it's considered the greatest is because every time Moshe Rabbeinu said something, obviously God speaking in his ear, every time he predicted something, it happened. Right? That's what we're saying over here. In other words, why is it surprising? I mean, you look at what happened to the Jews throughout the millennium. This happened, that happened, other things happened. We're not so surprised if we understand the internal workings of how the Torah works. But the fact that it was predicted thousands of years ago, that's what makes it unique. If you tell me, what we call backseat quarterback, oh, I would have done this, I would have done that, this would have changed the outcome and all that. Yeah, because now you have hindsight. Now you can see things and say, oh, no, I would have really done this. And then if they would have done this, I would have done the other thing. Right? Everyone's the backseat quarterback. But in the end, if you're a front seat quarterback and you know what's going on right now, and you're going to predict this is going to happen, that's something else. I grew up in the era, of Larry Bird, and he just, one of the biggest trash talking, athletes that existed, and there are stories that people say that he said, okay, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to get the ball. I'm going to make a head fake. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to shoot it right over you. I'm going to score, and we're going to win the game. And someone told this story, and he said, this is exactly what he told me was going to happen. Right? It's the end of the game. Someone gets in the ball, head fake, shoots, game's over. Right? Okay. Somebody, that cocky and, whatever, can make such a prediction. Maybe it's going to come through, maybe it's not. But if this happens 2,000 years ago and the prediction sticks and it only occurs to the Jewish people and it doesn't happen, you can search, but it's certainly not going to happen to anyone else. The odds are very, very small, right? I definitely think it's smaller than one over 16,000. It's probably one over about 32,000 or 64,000. It's a very, very small number. So someone could say, you know what? I don't care if it's a small number, right? I can still have free will. That doesn't prove anything. Okay, a person can always have free will, but this is an important piece, like all these other pieces. They're important pieces to show the probability, the fact that the Torah is going to be true, then it's not true. And someone who's going to make such a prediction, come on, he had to be the luckiest person in the world. He made, 5, 6, 7 predictions over here. And each one happened over thousands of years that no one in their right mind would have predicted. Right? They're not normal predictions. If you tell me it's a normal prediction, someone else could have done it, this isn't unique. If it isn't unique, okay, so then, so the Torah is not as unique as we think it is. God forbid. But the fact is, this has been proven, this has been shown, nothing else. No one else fits the bill. But who in the world, right? Who in the world is going to make such a prediction? Thousands of years before, you got 5, 6 different things over here. And each one, the probability, very, 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 very small. So you can tell me, well, in theory, it could happen again. If we're saying 1 out of 16,000, one time every 16,000 times. So if I had $1 million, I would bet every single time, not going to happen. That's going to happen to the Jewish people. Right, but it's 1 out of 16,000. Probability. Okay, you can play around with it. People can do all kinds of things with statistics. But the probability over here is extremely small. So again, is that a proof? Is that 100% proof that now I believe the Torah is true? It's not. It's not going to be. It's not going to be the only proof. There are other things along the way. We've spoken about a number of them. And I guess next week we'll speak, different, another different aspect, to show that this is something that cannot have been written by man, no matter how divinely inspired they are. People are not going to come up with this information unless it comes from God himself.
Right. Good point. Did I just hear myself echo?
It could be. I don't know. All three of us. It's a civil.
It's me, myself.
7 personalities. There it comes.
That's funny. Cool. Well, good deal, man. All right. Well, so guys, if we're looking for more suggestions for topical applications, I'm just kidding. Like Neosporin. I'm just kidding. Topics for the show. So if you have any good ideas, be sure to send.
Wait a minute. This is boring or I'm boring? You're going to get rid of me and bring someone else in. That's,
No. No, you keep the ratings too high with your controversial topics.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. All right, Rabbi. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you all for tuning in. Guys, remember, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share your videos with your friends, and if you guys are having issues getting alerts, send me an email or find me on Facebook. That's the best way to do it, because I'll keep everybody up to date, no doubt about it. Rabbi, thanks again for your time, and thank you, everybody. We'll see you later. Y'all have a great week. Bye.
חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד